I wanted to check if the new Napoleon movie is available yet, so I went to the totally illegal site I used, Weststuff, and the card for a different show caught my eye. Not because of anything I heard about it, but because I didn't hear anything about this show. Monarch: Legacy of Monsters. I was really intrigued by the fact that this really snuck by me. I'm not a huge Godzilla fan. I did watch a fair few Godzilla movies. I did quite like the 2014 one. And even though its sequels are not as good, I was aware of those movies ahead of time. So it was quite odd to randomly find a new show from that universe with 3 episodes already out. I'm not quite up to date with anything from the Monsterverse. I didn't even watch the last few movies, but I did know about them. And since I quite liked the 2014 Godzilla, I was like, hey, might as well give this one a shot. It's a bit of a bad habit of mine, giving things far too many chances. Man, the amount of H.P. Lovecraft I went through in spite of hating almost every single book of his, good lord. With the more recent Monsterverse movies, a common critique is that there's not enough of the monsters. It's a monster movie, show me the monsters. Not some low quality human drama. But with this show, it's at least somewhat clear from the start that it's not really a monster movie. It's called Monarch: Legacy of Monsters, with Monarch being an organization from the Monsterverse universe that deals with all things kaiju, or mutos they call them, even if half of them fly. So with the show straight up being named after the organization, it's of course to be expected that the show is about a bunch of teens going through a Goonies-like adventure. What the fuck? Okay, so, first of all, the show is not particularly great. Let's just get that out of the way. It's split into essentially 2 main time periods. There's more flashback and such besides the main timelines. But in the big picture, there's the modern period and then there's the 1950s or so. The modern stuff, not great. Even though it involves adults with adult jobs, like this chink being a teacher, it's essentially a teen drama. It would just about make more sense if the cast was 15. I could totally see this airing on Nickelodeon right after iCarly. The writing is mediocre and most of the characters are unlikable. At one point they even managed to run away from a kaiju in an open field. It's just not great. I'm not even sure if I should give or take points for them mentioning this is essentially the Goonies. Part of me is saying, hey, at least they're aware, but they don't do anything about that, and pointing out a flaw in the writing is not fixing it. They often try to be funny. There's rarely any action, much less monster action. There's a few reveals and sort of puzzles that they solve, but it's kinda pathetic. And yet in spite of all of that, after every episode I was looking forward to the next one to come out. And for a while I was actually puzzled about why that might be. And then I realized that it's the other half, the one from the 50s. It's not written all that much better, but it has less bad in it. The characters are much more likable and they tend to actually have some nuance and depth to them. And while they couldn't really carry the show by themselves, what is actually quite good about the old-timey section is essentially the lore. This section shows the beginning of the organization Monarch and talks more about what the monsters actually are and how they work, how the organization itself works, who the founders were. There's actually some nice lore to it. Nothing particularly groundbreaking, but it's nice. It's quite enjoyable. With my biggest criticism of this part being that it doesn't get more screen time. It tackles some of the problems that a Japanese woman had working for the US in the 50s. You know, thanks to the war and all that. And while it is rather nuanced and not presented in black and white, right and wrong, it just doesn't really have the time to go in depth. Something else that is noteworthy is the organization Monarch is quite nuanced, given that it's essentially the villain in a monster show. Something you wouldn't really have expectations from. It is quite fun to see how this organization was founded for good intentions, but then see how at times they had to put some of their morals aside for the sake of the work they are doing. And then see the decay decades later, when the founders are no longer in the picture. How the organization is not evil, it just moved away from what it once stood for. and how the people at the top now still do believe that what they do is the right thing to do. When it comes to a recommendation, I'm quite split. There is good to be found here, and I did enjoy some aspects of the show, but is the amount of good it has worth the 400 minutes runtime? Not really. Other shitty shows like Hello that are also split into running stories, that of Master Chief, and strong female diverse cast number 57, it at least had the decency of having those two parts be mostly unrelated. So after a few episodes I just started skipping the scenes with the lame chick in it, but unfortunately that's not really an option here. You do unfortunately kinda have to watch all of the current day stuff to understand the old timey stuff. You can skip a bunch of the dialogue and personal scenes. It's often clear enough when there's not going to be any exposition worth watching, but even then, I have a hard time recommending a show while also telling you to skip like half of it. So I don't have it in me to give it a yellow, recommended if. But I also don't have it in me to call it grey, not recommended. So I just go with green. Recommended only if, and that is if you're just really into the Monsterverse.